The small wooden cabin stood at the edge of a quiet forest. Birds sang in the trees, and the morning sun touched the roof with a warm glow. Inside the cabin, Daniel sat at a plain table, sipping his coffee. He enjoyed the silence that came with living away from busy streets. To the neighbors who rarely saw him, he was just a man who liked peace. Few people knew the truth about him. Daniel was not only a cabin owner. He was a commander in the state police, a man who had spent years leading officers during serious cases. He had faced dangers, broken large crime rings, and even trained new recruits. But when he was off duty, he wanted nothing more than to sit quietly, breathe in the fresh air, and let his thoughts rest. That morning, the forest path outside his cabin echoed with the crunch of tires. Daniel raised his eyes from his cup. A white van rolled to a stop near the front yard. 3 men stepped out, each wearing dark jackets with the letters HOA written in large print. Their sunglasses covered their eyes, and their movements carried an air of importance. Daniel placed his cup down. Something about their arrival felt strange. He had never signed into any neighborhood association. His cabin was on private land, owned by him alone. No group had authority here. Yet, these men acted as if they belonged. The first man, tall with a sharp voice, shouted, "Open up. We are from the HOA inspection team. This property has violations." Daniel stood up slowly. He could see through the window that the men carried clipboards, but their behavior was rough and forceful. Real inspectors did not behave like this. He opened the door with calmness, keeping his posture relaxed. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. The tall man smirked. "You cannot have this cabin without following the rules. You owe fees. If you don't pay, we will take action today." Daniel's eyes stayed steady. He spoke with polite tone. "There must be a mistake. This is not part of any association. Please check your records again." The second man, broader in shoulders, stepped forward. "Don't play smart. We have orders. You pay now, or we shut this place down." He pushed his hand against the wooden door frame as if to show power. Daniel did not move. He knew intimidation when he saw it. Years of service had trained him to read voices, eyes, and hidden meanings. These men were not inspectors. They were pretending. Their clothes were printed cheaply, their badges had no official seal, and their van carried no government license plate. He thought about revealing who he was at that moment, but he chose patience. It was better to watch how far they would go. The third man, who had stayed quiet until now, pulled out a paper. He waved it in the air. "This is the violation notice. Sign it, and pay $2,000 today." Daniel looked at the paper. The text was blurred, with spelling errors and no legal stamp. He almost smiled, but his face remained calm. He asked, "And if I don't sign?" The tall man narrowed his eyes. "Then we will remove you from this cabin. Right now." Daniel stepped back into his cabin slowly, as if thinking about their threat. The men exchanged quick glances, believing they had scared him. What they did not know was that Daniel was reaching for a small leather folder inside his desk. Inside was his real identification, the one that carried his title. As he touched the folder, memories of past missions crossed his mind. He had faced gangs stronger than these men. He had led raids where bullets flew and chaos ruled. Compared to that, 3 fake officers at his door were nothing more than a test of patience. He returned to the door, his folder still in his hand but not yet open. His eyes fixed on the men with quiet strength. "I will give you one chance to explain who sent you," he said in a calm, even voice. The men did not answer. Instead, they tried to step closer, thinking he was weaker than them. They had no idea the man they were trying to scare was the commander of the very force that hunted people like them. The forest around the cabin grew silent, as if waiting for what would happen next. The three men stood firm outside the cabin door, waiting for Daniel to make his choice. Their jackets with bold HOA letters looked convincing at a glance, but Daniel had seen enough to know they were false. The way they carried themselves was not professional but aggressive. Their tone was not of officials but of bullies looking for easy money. Daniel did not step back. Instead, he held the door slightly open and let his eyes study each face. The tall man had restless hands, tapping the side of the clipboard. The broad man kept shifting his feet as if ready to push forward. The third, who held the fake notice, kept glancing nervously at the van parked near the yard. "Gentlemen," Daniel said in a calm voice, "I suggest you think carefully before you continue this path." The tall man laughed with a dry sound. "Are you trying to scare us? We have the authority here." Daniel's lips formed a small smile. "Authority is not claimed. Authority is proven. Show me your official IDs and let us clear this matter." The broad man grew impatient. "We don't have to show you anything. You show us payment, or we take your cabin." He tried to step inside, but Daniel lifted his hand in a quiet signal that stopped him. The strength in Daniel's eyes was different from what they expected. He was not nervous, not angry, not even doubtful. He carried himself with the steady confidence of someone used to giving orders, not receiving them. "Stay where you are," Daniel said. His voice was even, but it carried a weight that made the men hesitate. The third man tried to recover the act. "You don't understand. Rules are rules. This land is under association control." Daniel finally opened his leather folder. Inside, the badge of the state police gleamed under the morning light. He raised it slowly, letting all three see it clearly. "My name is Daniel Hayes," he said firmly. "I am the commander of the state police. And this land is private property, under full legal ownership. Now, tell me again, who gave you orders to come here?" The fake officers froze. For a moment, silence filled the yard. Their fake power melted away as the truth stood before them. The tall man's hand stopped tapping. The broad man pulled his hand back from the door. The third man lowered the fake notice, his fingers trembling. You are state police?" the tall one asked, his voice cracking. "Yes," Daniel answered. "And I have dealt with imposters before. So you can either explain yourselves honestly, or face charges for impersonation, fraud, and attempted extortion." The men exchanged hurried glances. The act of confidence they had carried minutes ago was gone. The broad man muttered, "We didn't know." Daniel cut him off. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You came with a fake van, fake badges, and fake notices. You hoped to scare me into paying money that you have no right to demand. This is not ignorance. This is crime." The third man stepped forward, his voice shaking. "We were told this cabin was an easy target. We didn't mean." Daniel raised his hand again. "Stop. I will not listen to excuses. You are trespassing and pretending to be what you are not. But I want to know one thing. Who sent you?" The tall man hesitated. His pride seemed to fight with his fear. We were hired," he admitted at last. "Someone in town told us this cabin owner was alone and easy to pressure. We were promised a share if we collected fees." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "A share from whom?" The tall man lowered his head. A man named Griffin. He said he runs an association, but we never saw papers. He just pays us to act tough and collect. Daniel absorbed the name. Griffin. He had heard it before in reports from nearby districts, a man suspected of running small scams and false groups but never caught with enough proof. Now things were starting to connect. Daniel looked at the three men again. You will stay here until my officers arrive. If you try to leave, the consequences will be severe. Do you understand? None of them dared to argue. They nodded quickly, fear finally breaking through their earlier pride. Daniel stepped back into the cabin and reached for his radio. He pressed the button with steady fingers. This is Commander Hayes. I need a unit at my cabin immediately. 3 suspects in custody. Possible lead on Griffin. The voice of an officer crackled back, Copy, Commander. Units are on the way. Daniel set the radio down and returned to the doorway. The 3 men stood uneasily near the porch, their false jackets now looking like costumes under the bright sun. The forest was still quiet, but the tension in the air had shifted. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. If Griffin was behind this, more trouble would follow. And Daniel was ready for it. The 3 imposters stood uneasily in the yard, shifting their feet as they waited. Their boldness was gone. The sharp words and false confidence they had carried earlier now looked weak under Daniel's steady gaze. From a distance, the faint hum of engines grew louder. Soon, 2 state police vehicles rolled down the forest path and stopped near the cabin. Officers stepped out quickly, their uniforms neat and their presence strong. Commander, one of them greeted with respect, we came as fast as possible. Daniel nodded. These 3 were pretending to be HOA officers. They tried to extort money and threatened to remove me from my own cabin. They claim someone named Griffin sent them. The officers looked at the men, then back at Daniel. One officer pulled out handcuffs while another began reading their rights. The imposters did not resist. Their earlier courage had melted into silence. As the officers secured them, Daniel stepped aside and gave clear instructions. Check their van. Look for papers, devices, or any sign of Griffin's involvement. We need evidence. The broad man spoke suddenly, his voice almost pleading. We don't want trouble. We only did what Griffin told us. Daniel turned toward him. Then you should cooperate fully. If you help us, it may reduce the weight of what you face. But lies will only make things worse. The tall man sighed heavily, his pride breaking. Griffin told us to come here because he said this place was owned by someone soft, someone easy to scare. He never told us it was you. Daniel gave a small nod. And that is why crime built on lies always collapses. It cannot stand against truth. An officer called out from near the van. Commander, we found documents in a folder. Many notices, all with the same errors and no official marks. It looks like they have been targeting more people. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How many names are listed? The officer flipped through the papers. At least 20 cabins, sir. Some with amounts written next to them. Daniel stepped closer and looked at the folder. The names were scattered across small towns and forest areas. Each one marked with numbers that showed how much Griffin had demanded. This was no small trick. It was a growing scam. Secure the folder as evidence, Daniel ordered. And search the van completely. The imposters stood silently now, knowing their plan had fallen apart. Daniel studied them once more. Griffin uses people like you to do his dirty work. But the chain always leads back to the one at the top. That is where I am going next. The tall man lowered his head, defeated. The broad man stared at the ground. The third man whispered, Griffin doesn't like failure. He won't be happy we are caught. Daniel's voice was steady. He will be more unhappy when justice reaches him. The officers loaded the three men into the police vehicles. Their false jackets were taken as evidence, along with the folder and any tools from the van. The quiet forest now held the weight of truth. Before leaving, one officer asked, Commander, do you want to return with us? Daniel shook his head. No, I will remain here for now. Griffin may send others. I need to be ready. But take these men directly to the station and begin questioning. Keep me informed of every word they say. Yes, Commander, the officer replied. The vehicles drove away with the suspects, leaving Daniel once again in front of his cabin. The forest sounds slowly returned, birds calling as if nothing had happened. But Daniel knew the peace was only on the surface. Griffin's name was not new. Reports had mentioned him before, always close to scams, never close enough to catch. Now, Daniel had something solid. He walked back inside his cabin and sat at his table. His coffee was cold, but he did not mind. His mind was sharp, focused on the next step. Griffin was building a false network, and if 20 cabins were listed, there could be more victims still unaware. Daniel reached for his notebook and began writing down everything that had happened, every detail the imposters had revealed. He connected the dots, placing Griffin at the center. He knew one thing for certain. Griffin would not stop unless someone strong enough faced him directly. And Daniel was prepared to be that person. Outside, the sun began to lower toward the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The calm of the forest returned, but Daniel was already planning. The game was no longer about 3 imposters. It was about bringing down the man who had sent them. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a spark of the old fire that had carried him through his career. A challenge had arrived at his doorstep, and he would not let it pass. The evening shadows grew longer, wrapping the forest in quiet tones of gold and gray. Daniel sat inside the cabin, his notebook open in front of him. On the pages were names, numbers, and small clues gathered from the imposter's folder. Each detail painted a clearer picture of Griffin's growing scheme. Griffin was careful. He had built his scam not with direct action but by using others. Men like the 3 who had shown up earlier were tools, paid to threaten and collect. Griffin stayed in the background, enjoying the money while others carried the risk. But now, with documents in hand and suspects in custody, Daniel finally had a path that pointed toward him. The radio on his desk crackled. An officer's voice came through. Commander Hayes, the suspects are secured at the station. During questioning, they admitted Griffin operates from a small office near Brookfield Town. It is presented as a housing association service center, but it has no official registration. Daniel leaned forward, listening closely. Did they give an address? Yes, sir. Main Street, Building 12. The office has a signboard that says Community Living Solutions. Daniel wrote the words carefully in his notebook. He knew Brookfield. It was a modest town, not far from his cabin, where people valued trust. If Griffin had set up shop there, many families could already be victims. Keep the suspects under watch, Daniel ordered. Do not let word of their arrest spread yet. If Griffin hears too soon, he may vanish. I will handle this personally. Understood, Commander, the officer replied. Daniel closed the radio and looked out the cabin window. The forest seemed calm, but his thoughts were moving fast. He had dealt with criminals like Griffin before, clever enough to hide, bold enough to exploit, but always leaving traces. Every scam had a weak point, and Daniel intended to find it. The next morning, Daniel prepared for the trip to Brookfield. He dressed in plain clothes, not in uniform, to avoid drawing attention. His badge and sidearm stayed hidden but close. Sliding into his truck, he started down the narrow forest road toward the town. Brookfield greeted him with quiet streets and small shops opening for the day. People moved with the easy rhythm of daily life. Children walked to school, and shopkeepers swept their steps. Yet Daniel's sharp eyes searched for signs of the false office. On Main Street, he found it. A neat signboard read Community Living Solutions in clean letters. The glass door carried posters about property care, safety checks, and member fees. To an untrained eye, it looked official. But Daniel knew better. The name was vague, the promises empty. He parked his truck nearby and watched. Within minutes, he saw two men enter the office carrying envelopes. They left quickly, looking uneasy. This confirmed his suspicion. Money was flowing in, handed over by people who thought they were paying real fees. Daniel walked toward the office with calm steps. Inside, a young receptionist sat at the desk, smiling politely. "Good morning, sir. Are you here to discuss membership?" Daniel returned the smile but kept his voice steady. "I would like to know more about your association. What do you offer?" The receptionist handed him a brochure. "We ensure properties meet standards, collect fees, and keep communities safe." Daniel glanced at the brochure. No official seal. No government mark. Only smooth words designed to sound important. "Is Mr. Griffin available?" Daniel asked, watching her reaction. Her smile flickered for a second, then returned. "Mr. Griffin is busy today. Perhaps you can leave your name and come back tomorrow." Daniel placed the brochure on the desk. "Tell him Commander Hayes is looking for him. And let him know I already have his men and his papers." The receptionist froze, her eyes wide. Daniel did not raise his voice, but the words carried weight. He turned and left the office without waiting for her reply. Back in his truck, he sat quietly, watching through the windshield. He knew Griffin would hear those words within minutes. And when he did, Griffin would make a move. That was exactly what Daniel wanted. For a man like Griffin, fear often pushed him to reveal his hand. The town moved peacefully around him, unaware of the silent game beginning between two men. Daniel rested his hands on the steering wheel. The chase had started, and he was ready. Daniel sat in his truck across from the office, waiting. He knew the receptionist would tell Griffin everything. That was part of his plan. Sometimes, letting the enemy know you were close forced them to act faster. After 20 minutes, the office door opened again. A man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a phone to his ear. His eyes scanned the street quickly before he walked to a black car parked nearby. Daniel noted his careful steps and tense posture. This was not a regular worker. This was someone protecting Griffin's interests. Daniel wrote down the license plate number of the car before it drove off. He leaned back in his seat, calm and patient. He did not need to chase. He only needed to observe and let Griffin's people reveal themselves. That evening, Daniel returned to his cabin. The forest was quiet, the air cool with the scent of pine. He placed his notes on the table and reviewed them. Griffin's scam was bigger than he first thought. If people from different towns were being tricked, the money collected could already be large. As night fell, Daniel kept his lights low and watched the road. His instincts told him Griffin would not sit still. Men like him preferred to strike first, trying to scare away anyone who came too close. He was right. Near midnight, 2 cars rolled slowly down the forest path. Their headlights cut through the trees until they stopped near his yard. 4 men stepped out, their jackets plain this time, no false letters printed. They looked around with caution, then moved toward the cabin. Daniel stayed calm. He had already prepared. His radio was within reach, and his firearm rested holstered at his side. But he wanted to see what they would attempt before he revealed himself. The men approached the porch. One knocked firmly on the door while another tried to peer through the window. "Come out," a voice called. "We need to talk." Daniel opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. His posture was steady, his expression unreadable. "What brings you here at this hour?" The man in front crossed his arms. "Our boss doesn't like interference. You've been asking questions in town. It would be better if you stop now." Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on him. "And your boss is Griffin?" The man smirked but gave no answer. His silence confirmed the truth. "You should understand something," Daniel continued in a calm tone. "I am not just a curious neighbor. I am Commander Hayes of the State Police. The men who came here before you are already in custody. And your visit tonight only adds to the case." The men shifted uneasily. They had not expected him to speak so openly. One muttered, "Commander," under his breath. "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "And I suggest you decide wisely. Leave now and tell Griffin his time is running out. Or stay here and face arrest." For a moment, the group hesitated. Then the man in front tried to recover his pride. "You don't scare us. We can make trouble for you, even if you are police." Daniel lifted his radio, pressing the button. "This is Commander Hayes. 4 suspects outside my cabin. Send units immediately." The man's face lost its confidence. He turned sharply toward his group. "We're leaving," he ordered. They hurried back to their cars, starting the engines and speeding down the forest road. Daniel watched them go, his radio still in hand. "Units, follow the vehicles," he instructed. "Do not engage until I give the order. I want to see where they lead." The responding officer's voice came through. "Copy, Commander. We're on their trail." Daniel closed the radio and stepped back inside. The night grew quiet again, but he knew the chase was tightening. Griffin had shown his hand. Sending men to the cabin meant he was nervous. Nervous men made mistakes. Daniel returned to his table, opened his notebook, and wrote one sentence under Griffin's name: "He knows I am here. Now he will try harder. That will be his weakness." The forest outside was calm, but Daniel's mind was sharp. The fight against Griffin was no longer hidden. It had begun, and Daniel was ready for every step. The forest road stretched quietly under the pale light of the moon. Daniel sat inside his cabin, listening to updates over the radio. The officers who had followed the 2 cars were speaking in calm, steady voices, but the words carried weight. "Commander," one officer reported, "the suspects are heading east. They've left the main road and are moving toward an abandoned mill near the river." Daniel's eyes sharpened. The mill was an old structure that had been closed for years. It was far enough from town to avoid attention. A perfect place for Griffin to hide. "Keep your distance," Daniel instructed. "Do not approach until I arrive." Secure the perimeter and wait for my order. He gathered his gear with practiced speed. His badge, his sidearm, and his flashlight were placed neatly on his belt. Locking the cabin behind him, he stepped into his truck and started down the road. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The hum of the engine mixed with the steady beat of his thoughts. As he drove, memories of past operations filled his mind. He had walked into many traps before, but patience and planning had always carried him through. Tonight would be no different. Griffin believed fear could control people. Daniel believed truth and law were stronger. After half an hour, Daniel reached the meeting point where his officers waited. Their vehicles were parked discreetly behind the tree line, lights off. An officer stepped forward and saluted. "Commander, the suspects entered the mill. No one has left since." Daniel studied the dark outline of the building. The windows were broken, and parts of the roof sagged, but faint lights glowed inside. That meant Griffin was not hiding alone. "Positions?" Daniel asked. "We've covered the front and side exits," the officer replied. "But the rear is open ground. If they try to run, they'll have to use that way." Daniel nodded. "Hold your ground. No action until I go in. I want Griffin alive. He has answers we need." With that, Daniel moved forward alone, his steps silent on the dirt path. The mill loomed larger as he approached, its shadow stretching across the riverbank. He kept close to the wall, listening carefully. Inside, voices echoed. He could not make out every word, but the tone was clear fear and anger. "Why didn't you stop him?" a harsh voice snapped. "It had to be Griffin. You let him walk right into town and call himself a commander. Do you know what that means?" Another voice, one of the men from the cabin, stammered, "We tried, but he called back up. He isn't alone." Griffin's voice rose again. "Then he is closer than I thought. We cannot stay here long." Daniel pressed his back against the wall, listening. Griffin was planning to run. He could not allow that. He took a deep breath and stepped through the broken doorway. His flashlight cut across the dark room, landing on Griffin and the group of men standing around a table scattered with papers and cash. "Griffin," Daniel called firmly, his voice steady, "this is over." The men froze. Griffin turned, his face pale under the beam of light. "You," he whispered, his anger mixing with disbelief. "Yes," Daniel said. He held his badge high for all to see. "Commander Hayes. Your men are in custody, and your scam is finished." One of Griffin's men moved quickly, reaching toward his pocket. Daniel's voice boomed. "Don't even try. Officers have this place surrounded. You have no way out." Through the broken windows, Griffin could see the shadows of police units moving into position. The mill was surrounded, exactly as Daniel had said. Griffin's shoulders sagged. For the first time, his mask of confidence slipped. "You don't understand," he said bitterly. "I built this because people believe in rules they don't question. They pay without asking. It was easy." "Easy until now," Daniel replied. "The truth always catches up." The men looked at Griffin, waiting for his command, but none came. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "All of you, put your hands where I can see them." Slowly. Reluctantly, they obeyed. The sound of footsteps grew louder as Daniel's officers entered the mill, securing the suspects one by one. Griffin stood last, his expression hard, but his eyes full of defeat. "You think you've stopped me," he muttered. Daniel met his gaze. "No, I know I have." The night air rushed through the broken windows as Griffin was placed in handcuffs. The papers and cash were gathered as evidence, and the mill that had once been a hiding place became the center of his downfall. Daniel looked around the room, his calm expression never breaking. The chase had ended here, but his work was not done. Griffin's network might stretch further, and Daniel would follow it until every victim had justice. The forest outside was quiet once more, the sound of law restoring balance to the night. The abandoned mill was no longer a place of shadows. Flashlights cut across its broken walls as officers secured every corner. Griffin and his men were lined up against the wall, their hands bound. Papers, money, and false notices lay spread across the table, now tagged as evidence. Daniel stood in the center of it all, his expression calm but firm. He had faced bigger battles in his career, yet this one carried a weight of its own. Griffin had not used weapons or brute force. He had used fear, papers, and false authority. To Daniel, that was just as dangerous, because it preyed on trust. An officer approached with a report. "Commander, we searched the office in Brookfield. We found more files." Griffin kept records of payments from at least 40 property owners across the county. Many of them thought they were paying real fees. Daniel nodded slowly. The scale of the scam was larger than he first imagined. Contact every name on those lists. Let them know the truth. Return what was taken if possible. And make sure they understand this was never legal. "Yes, Commander," the officer replied. Griffin sat nearby, his head bowed. When Daniel stepped closer, Griffin looked up with eyes filled with bitterness. "You think you've done something great tonight. But scams like mine will never end. People want rules, and they follow them blindly. There will always be someone to take advantage." Daniel's voice was steady. "There may always be those who try. But there will also always be those who stand against it. That balance is what keeps communities safe. You lost tonight because you forgot that truth is stronger than lies." Griffin had no reply. His men remained silent as well, knowing their leader's words carried no more power. By dawn, the mill was cleared. Officers transported Griffin and his men to the station, while trucks carried away the evidence. The quiet river reflected the first light of morning, as if washing away the dark events of the night. Daniel returned to his cabin later that day. The forest greeted him with peace, birds calling in the trees and sunlight warming the yard. For a moment, it felt as if nothing had happened. The cabin was as it always was, simple, steady, untouched by the storm that had passed. Inside, Daniel sat at his table with his notebook. He wrote down the final details of the case, each step that had led from the first imposters to Griffin's capture. His handwriting was neat, his thoughts clear. This was more than a record, it was a reminder that even small lies could grow into dangerous networks if left unchecked. As he closed the notebook, his radio buzzed with updates. "Commander, the suspects are secured. Interrogation has begun." Griffin admitted he had plans to expand into neighboring states. "Your action stopped him before it spread further." Daniel answered with calm authority. "Good. Keep pressing for every detail. There may be others involved who we have not seen yet. Follow the trail until it ends." "Understood, sir," the officer replied. Daniel set the radio down and looked out the window at the tall trees. He breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the night lift. The peace he valued so much had returned, but he knew it was never permanent. There would always be challenges, always threats. That was why he had chosen his path long ago, not to escape conflict, but to face it so others could live in peace. Later that evening, a knock sounded at his door. Daniel opened it to find two neighbors from farther down the forest road. They looked grateful, carrying a small basket of bread and fruit. "We heard what happened," one of them said. "People in town are talking. You stopped a scheme that could have hurt many of us." "Thank you." Daniel gave a small smile. "You don't need to thank me. It was my duty. What matters is that the truth was restored." The neighbors left the basket and walked away, their voices light with relief. Daniel placed the basket on his table and sat quietly for a moment. The cabin was once again silent. The forest outside rustled with life, carrying on as it always had. Daniel leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a rare moment of rest. The storm had passed. Griffin's false authority was broken. And though new challenges would surely come, Daniel was ready. He was not just a man living in a cabin. He was Commander Hayes, protector of the state, and the forest itself seemed to know peace had been secured.